Now, every 10th of October, nations mark the World Day Against the Death Penalty, and that is a day used to advocate for the abolition of the penalty and raise awareness of the impact that this sentencing has on prisoners. Well, as you saw, this campaign was marked here in Kenya today, and joining me now to delve deeper on the issue is Demas Kiprono. He is the Deputy Executive Director of ICJ Kenya. Karibu sana, and thanks for joining us.
Having me.
Now, the law in Kenya does provide that a criminal can be sentenced to death.
Yes.
However, in Kenya, nobody has been executed for a number of years, since I think 1987.
Yes.
But there are, at the same time, hundreds of people who are still on death row, their fate unknown perhaps. What crimes does Kenya impose the death penalty for? Let me start by asking you that.
Yes, so under our laws, a person can be sentenced to death if they're found guilty of treason, if they're found guilty of murder or robbery with violence. However, there have been legal wins in terms of this because in 2017, the courts found that a mandatory death sentence is unconstitutional. And basically, they were trying to take back the discretion and the power to gauge whether a person can or should be given a death sentence to the judges. And so we are moving towards a more human rights compliant country in terms of the death penalty, as we start to understand how it violates our constitutional tenets and international law, and how it actually discriminates against the poor and vulnerable and minorities in society.
Now, there are, of course, major concerns that the death penalty is inhumane. It is the extremist form of torture as well, and the call is growing to abolish it, and that is also the view taken by ICJ. But tell us more about that. Why should the death penalty be abolished here in Kenya?
So our constitution guarantees everyone's right to life, and it also states that no one should ever be subjected to any form of torture, cruel, inhuman treatment or punishment. And we see torture as a physical and psychological form of torture. And as such, it is our learned opinion that it violates the Constitution and international law.
But having said that, what would the abolition of the death penalty mean for those who have committed the worst possible crimes? Where do you draw the line between the moral question and seeking justice as well? How then would these criminals be held accountable?
I think, first of all, we have to understand our criminal justice system as a system that we inherited from the colonial government. And if we go back to our communities, you'd find that justice was holistic. Justice was supposed to be meted to the person who committed the deed, to the society, and also the victim. It was a holistic process that was not really retributive or punish-oriented. It was meant to move the society forward. We find that in the Kenyan system and other systems similar to ours, the death penalty has been used to sort of try to met the biggest punishment to what the community or what the country considers the biggest crimes. Yet, if you look at it, you look at the underlying issues going on, it means that actually as a society we have failed. And most of the time, for example, when we talk about female prisoners who are under death row, you realize that most of them are there for domestic issues. Most of them had been subjected to sexual violence or other forms of violence for years and years. And so perhaps we need to open a conversation on how to holistically deal with our members of society who find themselves in the wrong side of the law, how to ensure that everyone is treated the same before the law, because you realize that rarely do we find the rich or the powerful being actually charged of anything, if even sentenced. or found guilty. Yeah.
Right, so the death penalty is not necessarily a deterrent to crime.
Yes.
What would the alternative be? Would it be life in prison?
So if you look at Wendai's bill, which seeks to amend the Kenya Defence Forces Act, the Penal Code, the Appellate Jurisdiction Act, and other laws, it basically tries to substitute the death penalty with life sentence. However, quite interestingly, this year, the Court of Appeal also found that the life sentences are a form of cruel, inhuman and treatment, and as such is unconstitutional. And so this is really an opportunity.
But let me interject there.
Yeah.
I'm sure a number of people are trying to make sense. If you have an individual who has committed an atrocious crime, for example, rape with murder,
Yes.
how could one then argue that being in prison for life is a cruel punishment when an individual has gone and committed a murder?
Being guided by that Court of Appeal decision, basically what I was trying to say is that the prospect of having someone sitting in prison for life, having a person know that they'll sit in prison for life from the day you enter until the day you exit the world, is in itself torture. And so there are other ways, other sentences that can be meted. For example, if someone has been found to have committed a very heinous crime, for example, 40 years is a long time. You can imagine what will happen in this world after 40 years. If you are taken away from society and brought back in 40 years, that's a real fundamental time in prison. And also there are parole processes, there are review processes that are supposed to, in the spirit of rehabilitation, gauge whether a person has actually made amends to themselves and to the country and changed. And so perhaps we should support these measures. Yeah.
And where are we when it comes to that change? I mean, how much progress has Kenya made, perhaps in comparison to other African countries or the world at large, in abolishing the death penalty?
Well, Kenya has made strides. First of all, we are something that is called de facto abolitionist. We still have it in our laws, but we don't do it. And so for 36 years, no one has been hung. And the last person who was hung was found guilty of treason and basically for being responsible of the coup in 1982. However, we still sentence people to death. As you can remember, the other day, the police officer found responsible of killing Willie Kimani and his companions was sentenced to hang. And so there is progress, because in 2009, in 2016, and last year in November, the respective presidents commuted all people in death row to life imprisonment. Right. And so as we speak, there are only 99 individuals men in prison for under the death sentence, and 22 women, 2 of which have been charged with murder. And so that is real progress. It shows that the country has actually moved in terms of thinking that a person can be so bad that they just need to be condemned and to be forgotten by society. Right.
Yeah. And finally, what does it take to make this change, or to abolish the death penalty? Is it a matter of amending the Constitution, or is it a case where the president just needs to sign something off and perhaps make that change from a death sentence to life in prison?
So this needs to be done through statutory amendment. Right. And if the bill by the minority leader is supported, and we implore all sides to support it, it will actually solve this problem by basically removing the death sentence in Kenya.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And